thank you all for coming to this event. It's important to think about the range of possible solutions to the crisis that we face. I will offer a more radical solution than I think we've been contemplating lately. My areas of emphasis in graduate school were criminology and political economy, but the graduate program at UT also has an emphasis in environmental sociology, and on the recommendation of peers, I took a course from Sherry Cable, a noted expert in the field. I soon saw at work in the facts of resource extraction and environmental degradation Edwin Sutherland's concept of analogous social injury. Analogous social injury was Sutherland's principle for detecting opportunities for enlarging the criminal law. If some action taken by a corporate or a government agent has an analog to interpersonal behavior the criminal law has long identified as an offense, then the action suggests itself as a candidate for analogous legal control. That is, should be regarded as criminal in principle and in law. Sutherland wrote a book about it, White Collar Crime, that was published in 1949, and in it he argued that the rich and powerful are able to shape law and consciousness in ways that reproduce their power and privilege. The publishing company seemed to prove his point when they censored his book upon release. I thought analogous social injury would make a good seminar paper, but a paper showing that environmental destruction for personal gain is analogous to criminality would surely fall short of the word count that was associated with the assignment. This is so obvious, I thought. So I set out to explain how environmentally destructive business practices manage to avoid the criminal label. And leaning heavily on Antonio Gramsci's ideas of hegemony and the organic intellectual, his concepts capturing the method of control through the command of ideas and intellectuals, I showed how capitalists are able to hide the truth and change the conversation about environmental destruction. I also became more aware of the seriousness of the problem confronting us, of the problem of global climate change. Professor Cable encouraged me to submit my paper to an academic journal, which I did, only to have the editor, after a round of supportive reviews, refuse to publish it. In trying to understand what had happened, I discovered that the editor, an industrial sociologist, had received significant funding from polluting corporations, some of which I criticized in my paper. I considered filing an ethics complaint with the American Sociological Association, but seeing how I was a graduate student and I didn't want to burn bridges, I sucked it up. I sent the paper off to another journal instead. They published it after another round of reviews, and it went on to win the 2002 Sociological Spectrum Award for Best Article. But more gratifying than that was the article's impact. My approach played a role in shifting academic work in this area from the too often sterile and passive sociology of collective behavior and social movements to a more radical political sociology of state corporate power. That paper, Advancing Accumulation and Managing Its Discontents, the U.S. Anti-Environmental Counter-Movement, documented the multi-layered and well-coordinated structure of corporate-funded foundations and think tanks, faux academic science mills, fake grassroots movements, what the industry calls astroturf, corporate attorneys and lobbyists, and major media outlets that lie behind the manufacture of an illusion, namely that the earth is fine and really indestructible, that if it isn't, the innovative dynamic of the free market will, in Promethean fashion, generate technology allowing humanity to repair it. And in the meantime, the corporations have heard the public loud and clear. We're cleaning up our act by providing environmentally sound commodities and services, what they called greenwashing. With a colleague, Laurel Phoenix, I published 2 more articles using this approach to show the persistence of the structure under the Bush administration. Laurel and I recently discussed applying the model to subsequent administrations, such as the Trump presidency. A cursory look at the facts indicates that we would replicate our findings. There is a concerted industry effort to conceal and obscure climate change through misdirection and delegitimation. We have to admit the problem of global climate change. It is real and catastrophic. The fact that humanity is facing what environmentalists call overshoot and collapse has been established not only by the bulk of scientific work over the last several decades, but is well known by forest rangers and wildlife officers, as well as hunters and fishers. Even the average citizens can see that something is amiss. Armadillos are now common in my home state of Tennessee. They become standard roadkill alongside the possum. Armadillos have been sighted as far north as Chicago, and they carry the wasting disease, leprosy. They are coyotes too. And homeowners along the East Coast are seeing the values of their properties plummet as sea levels rise. They are unable to dump their homes because buyers know what's coming. We must also identify the culprit. It's the capitalist mode of production. What Alan Schneeberg, some 25 years ago, called the treadmill of production. We're exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet. Extractive and polluting corporations are so committed to the imperative of profit maximization and to lives of extravagance, opulence, and leisure that they're prepared to sacrifice the future of their own children and grandchildren. And they've constructed a vast propaganda apparatus, a fog machine, to ensure this happens, the anti-environmental counter-movement. What is to be done? Well, many suggest regulating corporations, and I hesitate to disagree, but there is a downside to this that most folks don't talk about. It's not only that it's not enough, it's without a larger comprehensive framework, we may be helping plunderers and polluters, and I can give you an example of where we are. For years, environmental groups have invoked the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, the SMCRA, and the Clean Water Act, CWA, to stop mountaintop removal, a problem I'm quite familiar with, having roots in East Tennessee. Environmental groups demand that mining companies follow the law, but mining companies are following the law. The Army Corps of Engineers, in adherence to the law, have approved 99% of all corporate permit applications under the Clean Water Act and in accordance with SMCRA. As Richard Grossman of the Program on Corporations, Law, and Democracy notes in a 2002 open letter to Joan Milhern of Earth Justice on Earth Day, quoting him, "Both laws have enabled polluting and ruling corporations to legalize their destructions, to block the public from using democratic processes to stop corporate assaults on life, liberty, and property, from advocating people's visions and agendas. These laws have challenged people, including dedicated lawyers, into endless regulatory and juridical struggles over definitions and minutiae, struggles which conceded corporate's right to govern communities and devour the earth. These laws have diverted passionate and creative minds away from strategies and tactics that empower local jurisdictions to prevent their eviscerations by absentee corporations and politicians for hire." There were people, he continues, who understood that there could never be sane strip mining in Appalachia's ridges and hollows. Alas, Washington, D.C. environmental groups joined with corporate lobbyists and politicians to establish rules under which coal corporations could strip mine forever and ever. They betrayed the folks from the ridges and the hollows, whom Save Our Cumberland Mountains, who we called SOCM when I was a kid, who brought together over the previous decade in a valiant effort to ban strip mining. And I remember SOCM, how they boycotted the legislation written in their names that enabled extractive corporations to continue blasting the tops off of our Cumberland Mountains. And I remember watching Jimmy Carter, in a well-publicized bill signing, deceive the public into thinking that our mountains would be saved. Now, noting the difference between progressivism, which works within a legal structure that accepts the legitimacy of corporate rule and power, and populism, which desires to see corporations, if not abolished, return to their previous status subordinated to democratic rule, Grossman laments the opportunity lost. If the quarter-century investment in SMCRA and CWA had gone instead to challenging corporations' ability to use law and our Constitution and our governments against people, communities, mountains, rivers, and species, and into asserting the people's authority to govern, there would be no mountaintop removal today. He warns in his letter, before young activists and lawyers throw themselves into another 25 years of trying to make corporate rights laws work to people's and Earth's advantage, wouldn't it make sense to explore the nation's experience with regulatory law, with corporations, with Constitution? This was in 2002, happened to be the year that I published that article. Well, that was 17 years ago. We have only 8 more years to go before activists and lawyers would have thrown themselves into another 25 years of trying to regulate corporations to save the environment. But capitalism is unsustainable. It cannot save the environment. We have to change our approach. We have to shift the emphasis from reformism to radicalism. And the threat is that dire. Our future lies in reclaiming our republic from corporate power and establishing a democratic socialist order where economic decisions are made not for the sake of a privileged few who cannot see beyond their own avarice and egoism, but for the good of humanity and the planet and all the beautiful and precious things that live on it. Thank you.